Hey, soccer fans, welcome back to another episode of the Feed the Fire podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and we are talking Chicago Fire contract extensions, not the players as much. The Chicago Fire today, November 14th, announced extensions for two of their top executives, Georg, Heitz, and Sebastian Pelzer. Not the news a lot of Chicago Fire fans wanted. These guys getting extended, these guys who have not been able to put together a playoff team in 5 years, which is pretty much statistically impossible. But we're going to break down the press release from the Fire, give you some thoughts, as well as go over a little bit of other MLS news right after this intro music. Hey, Fire fans and Major League Soccer fans, welcome back to the Feed the Fire podcast. We're at episode 61. Thanks for hanging out with me all these shows, all these weeks, as we continue to look at Major League Soccer, as we continue to look at the hometown team here, the Chicago Fire. Now, the big news announced today, the extensions of Georg Heitz and Sebastian Pelzer, the sporting director and technical director here of the Chicago Fire. This is something that about midway through the season, nobody thought was going to happen. These guys were as good as gone. The speculation and rumors coming out of the Chicago Fire front office was that Mansueto had realized these guys are not building a successful club and was ready to part ways with them, not renew their contracts, and just move on. Then something happened right about that 6-game losing streak, and Mansueto said, you know what, let's stick with these guys. And for those people who are being rational and reasonable and looking at both sides of the coin, which I try to be. As a lawyer in my day job, I try to do those sort of things. What they're seeing and what they're saying is that we have a Chicago Fire franchise who's reinvesting in itself. They are reinvesting in academy, youth teams. They're building new training facilities. They're doing a lot more community outreach and public partnerships. The social media team is doing stuff. The marketing team, considering the garbage that is on the field, the marketing team is doing great work. Relatively, right? Like, there is a lot to be said for that foundation. And then if you want to throw in the success that the sister club under the same ownership group in Switzerland, FC Lugano, is having, those are some of the things that people are saying Joe Mansueto is really valuing that in Heitz and Pelzer, which is why they got a contract extension. Also, in his kind of actual press conference, albeit it was on Chicago Fire Media, not even a press conference. It was just a kind of a self-prepped interview that he got to put out. It would be almost better if he just kind of recorded himself rather than trying to feign this fake fluff interview here. But he does come out and say that they have improved. So in his mind, he has seen Heitz and Pelzer improve this club, even though they've gotten worse in the standings year over year, even though we're going to get into all this stuff, right? So that is kind of the positive stuff. So that's the framework that Joe Mansueto is making his decision to re-sign Heitz and Pelzer in. Again, better infrastructure. Also, I was in a Twitter Spaces with Alex Calabrese over at Men in Red, and he's saying what he's hearing from inside the organization is that it's a very, very positive culture, that all the employees there thinking we're right on the cusp of something great, things are moving in the right direction. Okay, that's fair and good, and I'm glad the people over there are in a great working environment. But at the end of the day, the club on the field, the senior team, is trash and has been trash for over a decade, and Heitz and Pelzer have shown that they cannot change the on-the-field product. So I think that's both sides of the coin. Let's get into the actual press release that was issued here by the Chicago Fire. This is right off of their website as of 9:58 this morning. And I'm just going to read it here for you, and I'll give my candid takes as we go through it. Chicago Fire FC today announced that sporting director Georg Heitz has signed a contract extension Extension. The 2024 MLS campaign will mark Heitz' 5th season in charge of the club's football operations. Additionally, the Fire has agreed to contract extension with technical director Sebastian Pelzer, who will also return for his 5th season in Chicago. So some of the comments that I've been hearing about this is they still don't know what Heitz does versus what Pelzer does. And it seems like both of them are best at the same thing. And that's like the internal club building and the development and the infrastructure and all that sort of thing. That there really should be someone else who knows roster building and scouting and player development and identification and building a unified identity through the academy system. So that's what they're missing. They essentially have two guys doing the same thing. But hey, we've also seen that on their on-the-field signings, right? They're signing two of the exact same strikers. They're signing two of the exact same central midfielders. So I guess it's a recurring theme with the Chicago Fire. All right, continuing on. Now we start with the quotes from Mansueto. Quote, "I'm pleased that Georg and Sebastian will continue to lead our sporting operations," said Chicago Fire FC owner and chairman Joe Mansueto, "as we continue working toward building a world-class organization deeply connected to the community. Georg and his team have created a strong foundation that will lead to sustained success." I'm going to pause right there because I, as a fan, haven't seen that foundation over the last 4 or 5 years. We have seen the on-the-field product get worse and worse and worse. We have not seen any of the infrastructure improve until this year. It was almost like Pelzer and Heitz were like, "Oh crap, our job's on the line. We got to pull that thing we were saving out of our butt in order to look good for the boss," right? Or it's like, an actual player in their contract year playing really, really, really well to get that extension or to get that next big deal. That's what it seems like here. One other thing people are saying is that, well, part of their development and growth and foundation is look at all these homegrowns. I'm like, homegrowns are practically falling into your lap. They're homegrowns. They're right here. They're in your backyard. Like, they're the ones trying out and getting in your academy system. This isn't like any brilliant type of move. They're here. And besides, your roster is so bad. What if you weren't playing Brian Gutierrez? What if you weren't playing Slonina or Brady? What if you weren't playing Mauricio Pineda? Like, it's not like they had this brilliant moment and like, these are the guys that we have found and that we've identified. They're like, no, I mean, I'll give you the fact that they signed Pineda to a contract extension, and other news just announced today they signed Gutierrez to a contract extension, and we'll talk about that probably in the second half of this show. But again, you can't say they've built this wonderful foundation because you've got 4 homegrowns on your roster, I think, 3 or 4 homegrowns, and you couldn't even integrate guys from CF2. You couldn't even get Wyatt Ohmsberg, who's an MLS vet, maybe not in the roster rule sense, but is a veteran of Major League Soccer. You couldn't even get him out of CF2. You kept trying to play Kendall Bartz. That wasn't working. You've got guys like Amari Glasgow, Sergio Orahel, Alex Moniz, who are tearing it up either in Nations League or in MLS Next Pro. They couldn't even get first team minutes. Have them left. So don't try to tell me you built a foundation other than just this last year building a new training facility. Mansueto continues, "Our fans deserve to support a team that is a consistent contender for trophies. And heading into the 2024 season, we're all committed to taking the necessary steps to bring more success to the Chicago Fire." Joe, you got to have success before you can have more success, all right? So don't sell me on that. The article now continues. "Under Heitz's guidance, the Fire have become a leader in identifying and developing domestic and international talent." No, they haven't been. Again, the domestic talent are homegrowns that fell in their lap. The international talent, Heitz's best international signing is Martin Heile-Selassie, who he got from his sister club, Lugano, right? And then when he tried to do it with Doumbia, that didn't work out either. Who are the other big international signings? Jairo Torres, bust. Kasper Shabilko, who I still technically think takes up an international spot, bust. Xherdan Shaqiri, bust. Now, in some chats, you got to go back to some of the prior signings. Like Beric might have been a decent signing. Couldn't work with Wiki, though, from the way the system was played, as far as I remember. People are saying Przemysław Frankowski has turned into a really, really good player, and they got some money off of that. But as far as like identifying and developing, name one player who has gotten better with the Chicago Fire as a result of the coaching and the system that they're running and the club they are. People are going to throw out John Duran. The dude was here for a year. He didn't even see the field for the first half of a season, which was, again, so stupid, right? The coach, Ezra, didn't know what to do with him or wanted to bring him along slowly. And then it didn't seem like anyone in the front offices were going to be like, you got to play this guy. He's got potential. We want to sell him. Like, a guy that only played maybe half a season, you can't say we identified and developed that talent. No, you cannot. Even the moment Duran got here, he already had 1 foot in England looking for a Premier League club. Where did I leave off here before my tirade? The club has implemented a global scouting operation, adding a reserve team, built a multi-club network by acquiring Swiss Super League side FC Lugano, and placed a greater emphasis on developing players from within the Chicago Fire Academy. Additionally, the Fire have invested more resources in performance, data and analytics, and nutrition, and is in the process of building a state-of-the-art multi-million-dollar performance center at the heart of Chicago to further enhance its efforts. So those are the kind of things I talked about at the beginning, kind of the positive side of why Mansueto, in his mind, can justify extending Heitz and Pelzer. Those kind of internal things, those kind of internal investments, and added incentives for players to come here. Because why would a player want to come? Like, you don't have a good training center. Like, why would you pick Chicago over any other MLS club or any other club if you were gonna come to North America or, you know, a lower division in Europe, right? Data and analytics. Like, as an executive, if you're like, where's your data and analytics department? Like, executives don't want to come here and have to start from scratch in a lot of respects. So again, they're still trying to catch up to the rest of the league here, and I guess that's what Mansueto sees as a positive. But on the flip side, what have they been doing the last 4 years of their tenure? Nothing. So whatever you want to praise them can also be used to condemn Heitz and Pelzer. Now, Joe Mansueto here, quote, "I'm excited to continue leading the Chicago Fire," this is George Heitz now. "I'm excited to continue leading the Chicago Fire, and I'd like to thank Joe Mansueto for his trust and support. Despite falling short of our collective goal to qualify for the playoffs, we've made improvements and professionalized the organization in multiple areas to be consistently competitive in the coming seasons and over a long term." Let me interrupt you there, Mr. Heitz. Despite falling short of it, you literally admit that you failed, and you get rewarded with a contract extension. Ridiculous. Heitz continues, "We are confident that by adding the right pieces," I'm not confident you can add the right pieces. You haven't shown that you've been able to identify top-tier talent in any of your signings and have them actually work out for the Chicago Fire. I am not confident that you can add the right pieces, so we can't even talk about the effect that these right pieces would have. But he goes on, "We're confident that by adding the right pieces, we will be a strong contender in the Eastern Conference next season and become a team that brings more success and joy to our fans each week." First of all, I've heard that every offseason from you since you've been here, so I'm not going to believe it. And bring joy to our fans? You're talking about bringing joy to the fans? Oh my gosh. How out of touch are you with the fans? The article continues, "Leading up to the 2023 season, Chicago made back-to-back club record moves by transferring academy product Gago Slonina and teenage striker John Duran to the EPL clubs Chelsea and Aston Villa." I've already ranted about how they shouldn't get credit for that. "The club has promoted 10 homegrowns to the first team in the last 4 seasons, including Chris Brady, Brian Gutierrez, Mauricio Pineda, who have emerged as key players for the Fire." So they've promoted 10 homegrown players to the first team, but only 4 have been like consistent starters. If you want to take Brady, Guti, Pineda, and Slonina. Brady and Gutierrez are recognized as 2 of the top young players in the league in October after securing spots on the MLS 2222 list. And then it continues on to talk about them and talk about Heitz and Pelzer here. Heitz originally joined the Fire on December 20th, 2019, after a highly successful 9-year tenure in the Swiss Super League. In his role as sporting director, Heitz is responsible for overseeing all aspects of the Fire's football operations. Pelzer joined the Fire as technical director on December 28th, 2019, following a distinguished 16-year playing career, and reports directly to Heitz. Okay, so I did not know that about Sebastian Pelzer. that he is a former footballer. I learned something here today. Why don't we do a quick little search here? Oh, look at this guy. He played for such clubs as FSV Samrohr, Kaiserslautern, Blackburn Rovers for a few years, only making one appearance though, Eintracht Trier, Saarbrücken, Dynamo Dresden, Rot-Weiss Aalen, and Hansa Rostock. So looks like a lot of German clubs. He had a decent playing career, 95 to 2015. So, about a 20 plus year playing career, even with 2 call-ups to the German under 15 team. How great is that? There's Sebastian Pelzer, your technical director, or your sporting director. I forget which one it is because they're both essentially doing the same job and failing at the same job. Speaking of additional failings, again, I think these guys should have been gone at the end at the evening of decision day, because if you look at any sports organization in the country, probably the world, but in the country, anytime you have an executive or a coach who is consistently mediocre or subpar, they get moved after a few seasons. And it's always, we like them, we respect them, we wish them well, they're a great coach, but they just couldn't get it done and it's time to move on, right? That's what should have happened here. They couldn't get it done for 4 years and they've been rewarded with a contract extension. The only way that this is somewhat acceptable is if there is another executive hire who comes in and literally does nothing but work on the roster, and then you let Heitz and Pelzer do everything else. That's the only way this could be even somewhat bearable, but that's not the rumor. Actually, what the rumor is that they're bringing back the same coaching staff. Now, who's going to be the head coach? We're starting to hear some whispers that Klopas all of a sudden wants to be the head coach now. That to me would just be more awful, right? He's of all the terrible, losing, and awful things the Chicago Fire have done as a club over the last 10 years, the one person who has been there through all of it is Frank Klopas. And the one person who's had the most impact on the field is Frank Klopas. How he still has a job is my guess, is anyone's guess. But how he's being considered for the head coaching position is just absolute insanity. The literal definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But what we're hearing, the rumors, the whispers, the tentative reporting, is that the Fire are down to 3 finalists for the head coaching position, and we should find out maybe by the end of the week. But again, guys, the nightmare just continues here. Let's juxtapose the Chicago Fire with another terrible, terrible team who fired their coach, Toronto FC. Now, what did they do? They realized how bad things were. They got rid of Bob Bradley when he couldn't control the locker room. They're probably going to move on from a lot of these players. They bring in former Canadian men's national team coach John Herdman. And he says, this is his quote, "It's the phrase of enough is enough," Herdman said at Friday's year-end media availability. Quote, "The tolerance level of what might have been tolerated in previous preseason arrivals won't be tolerated for this team," end quote. He is saying the old way is dead. We are moving on. You're going to get on board with me. We're going to change things. And the Chicago Fire continue to just do the same thing over and over again and just continue to fall further and further behind. Like, the Fire could drastically improve next season and still would only be maybe like 6th in the Eastern Conference. You've got every other team, and I've talked about it in previous episodes as far as like player signings, that NYCFC is a global scouting network. We saw what Miami has done with Messi and co. Charlotte FC still has Swiderski. They added Capetti. Like, they've still got some ballers there. Red Bull, they just fired their entire coaching staff after finishing 9th and then getting bounced embarrassingly by FC Cincinnati in the first round of the playoffs. So do you think if the Fire would have actually finished 9th and had that exact same thing happen to them, which in all likelihood would have happened to them, the same thing that happened to the Red Bulls, you think they would have actually fired anybody? No. They would have given everyone contract extensions even longer because they made, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes if you're listening on the podcast, because they made the playoffs. The nightmare continues. Every other club is doing things to improve themselves, and the Chicago Fire are not. Whew, that was quite the mouthful. Guys, I'm going to remind you all, go out and get a bottle of Skira Icelandic spring water from your local 7-Eleven. So when you're ranting and raving about the Chicago Fire, you can at least keep your thirst quenched and keep your throat cool here. Icelandic for clear, Skira water comes from a spring in a government-protected nature preserve in Iceland with naturally low mineral content. This isn't your average water. Clearly, pun intended, it's one of the best. And a big thank you to Skira Icelandic Spring Water for supporting the show from our pre-show development all the way through the off-season. We really do appreciate it. And I'm sure for anyone who's listening over at Skira, I know our listeners appreciate your support as well and keeping us out here on the air. Now, we did not get any segment from John Donovan this week. I think he's just, was just too upset by this news. But I did send him the article about the contract extensions for Heitz and Pelzer, and he did send me this response. The Chicago Fire gave the finger to the city of Chicago and re-signed the GM. Unbelievable. So there's John Donovan's thoughts on the Chicago Fire's executive moves. Now, what the Chicago Fire did to kind of, I don't know, maybe hide the story, get a little goodwill, was they also announced a contract extension for Brian Gutierrez. By the way, talking about the timing of this news, right? They don't do it during any of the playoffs. They don't do it immediately after decision day when other clubs are putting this stuff out, making decisions, getting ahead of the curve, moving forward, looking at getting ready for the offseason. The Fire do nothing. Essentially, they've got like a lame duck month. They wait till there's a break in the playoffs and before international break and announce this. And then in the morning, they announce the news the fans hate. And then in the afternoon, they announce the news the fans love. Brian Gutierrez is now under contract with the Chicago Fire through 2028 as a homegrown U22 initiative player. Here is what Georg Heitz has to say. It has been exciting to watch Guti grow over the past 4 seasons with the Chicago Fire and become a very important player for the club. We take pride in rewarding our homegrown players for the contributions to the club, and this new contract recognizes the value Guti brings to the organization, both on and off the field. We look forward to seeing his continued development in the coming years. I will give them credit. When they do have homegrowns, they do try to treat them well. We saw with Slonina holding out for a big move, not just, to get a few million and say, look what we did. They held out. They got him a really good contract. He ended up in Chelsea, probably a club that he wanted to go to. They re-signed Mauricio Pineda, and they have now extended Brian Gutierrez. The only thing as I worry about Guti's development, I don't think he is going to be developing if the same coaching staff continues. We really needed him to make a big step forward this season, and he was poised to do that. But then the coaching staff couldn't figure out how to best use him for half a season. They couldn't figure out how to get him and Shaqiri to play together. And then you had Shabilko and Kamara as your starting strikers. Who's going to allow Gutierrez to rack up assists if those are the strikers you're working with, at least the way they played this season, right? So I'm really concerned that Gutierrez is not going to make those developmental steps forward given the current coaching staff. However, that could work in the Chicago Fire's favor, because if they've got him under contract for another 5 seasons, then he can be a building block for this club in MLS. And if he can just become a star in MLS, then that can elevate the Chicago Fire. He doesn't need to be the next John Duran and get sold for big bucks and move overseas, right? He doesn't need to be that guy for the Fire to consider this a very, very good signing. Now, here's what Gutierrez had to say. It's a tremendous feeling to know that the club believes in me as a player and as a person. I'm grateful for the opportunity to build on that confidence and improve on the field, to always do my best for this club, for the fans, and for the city. End quote. Gutierrez always has the right thing to say. He's always available. He's fantastic. So what more can you say? As a person, as an ambassador for the Fire, if you will, and as a player, there's very little that you would want more out of him. The article goes on to point out some of his accomplishments as well. Youth national team from U16 through U23, part of the Olympic national team. He is on his third contract now with the Chicago Fire. He signed his second deal in 2022 that ran through 2026, and now he gets the extension through 2028. He is one of 3 U22 initiatives: Federico Navarro, Yorgos Koutsias, and Brian Gutierrez. There we go. He will occupy the homegrown U22 initiative roster slot. So if you like following roster rules, there you go. So this is a phenomenal signing, phenomenal extension. And again, for me, it falls under 2 categories. He is going to become really, really good where a big club or even a medium to big club in Europe is going to throw a boatload of money at the Chicago Fire, and he's going to get transferred. And the Fire are going to have even, since he's under contract through 2028, maybe a club like, I'm going to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about just by quoting Ajax here, right? A team like Ajax picks him up, plays him for a couple years, and then flips him to some sort of top 5 European League team or major Champions League club, whatever it is. The Fire are going to have a big sell-on percentage because he's got their contract. He signed a contract with them through 2028. So that's a really good piece of business move there. But then also, even if he doesn't become that like amazing next big breakout thing, but just becomes a star in MLS, you can build around him. You got him locked up on a homegrown deal. You want to compare it to the NFL or NBA, you got him on the rookie deal. He's on a rookie deal right now. We don't know the terms dollars and cents wise, but I imagine if you're going to keep him and build a club around him, it should be considered a club friendly deal. One other thing on the Heitz and Pelzer extensions, we don't know how long their extensions are for. I expect that info to come out in one way or other at some point during the season. That's the Chicago Fire news. Quickly, some MLS news. The league awards are out. They've been slowly releasing them, so let me quickly recap them for you. Yorgos Giacomakis of Atlanta United wins Newcomer of the Year. I think he was the newcomer with the most goals, so that seemed to be a no-brainer, plus the guy's influence on games. And he still was, second or third in the Golden Boot race, despite missing a handful of games with injury. I think that's deserved. Thiago Almada, his teammate, named Young Player of the Year. I think there was probably a little bit more of a discourse to be had on Young Player of the Year here, but I think Almada deserving as well. St. Louis's Roman Berkey named Goalkeeper of the Year. I'm not going to necessarily say Roman Berkey shouldn't win it, but the fact that he won it in such a landslide has me scratching my head. Like, nobody else was considered for it was like it was him and no one else. Like, to me, that makes me think that anyone who was voting just kind of got it in their head that this is the guy. Now, to be fair, the player vote was as much of a landslide as the media vote and the fan vote. So I don't know, maybe it is that deserving of it, but it raised an eyebrow for me. Here's another eyebrow raiser. Matt Miazga of FC Cincinnati's Defender of the Year. Now, I don't know how he can win Defender of the Year other than just the fact that he's the best defender on the best team. If you want to look at the goals allowed, they allowed 39 goals. So that's just over a goal a game. But it's nowhere near, the 32 goals only allowed by Nashville. Most teams in the playoff contention here on the top level, I'm just looking at goals allowed, right? Cincinnati allowed 39, Orlando allowed 39, Philly 41, Red Bull 39, even New York City only allowed 39 goals. So if you're looking purely at goals allowed, that's really not it. And I've seen people talking about how his statistics as a defender aren't even as good as a handful of others in the league. So this one really he's got me scratching my head. I'm not sure how Matt Miazga wins Defender of the Year. And I think a few of the voters are probably going to regret it after his post-game antics against Red Bulls. in game 2 of that first round of the playoffs. But anyway, that was the decisions. And with that, Feed the Fire fans, we're going to wrap the show up tonight. Thank you for listening. Please let me know your thoughts on this on Twitter. You can find me at GlassHouseSoccer. You can email me, glasshouseSoccer@gmail.com. Follow along on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Let's go Fire. Enjoy the playoffs. Enjoy the international break. We'll talk to you again next week.